Thank you very much. It's good to be back with you all at ISD. Yeah, so let's sit for a while. We'll sit for half an hour. I believe you guys sit for. I will lightly guide in the beginning, but we'll mostly be sitting together quietly, but I'll guide at the very beginning here. So I always like to say that it's important to cultivate the resting of attention on an object in meditation, a meditation object, whether that's the breath, body, or sounds, and that the object of the meditation ultimately is less important than our relationship to the object. So all that to say, really bringing in any sense or degree of kindness and gentleness, interest, curiosity to the resting with the object is more important than what it is you're resting on. So as you're ready, I invite you to come into presence, lowering the shoulders, unclenching the jaw, unfurrowing the brow, and really releasing any areas of holding in the body if possible. And finding in your posture balance between relaxation and ease, uprightness and alertness. And let's let attention open to sounds to bring in a sense of receptivity. And that could be connecting with any sounds, could be the sound of my voice or hum or current or something in the background of your environment. And resting there for a moment, getting a sense of the whole body sitting. Just knowing the feet on the ground, maybe the back against the pillow, head against the pillow, hands resting gently. Just sit and know you're sitting. And then perhaps connecting with sensations arising and passing in the body, maybe noticing a softening, a spreading, even a tightness or warmth, coolness, tingling, numbness, whatever sensations are present, connecting with the body sitting. Naturally breathing, expanding and contracting almost like a balloon. Perhaps there's a noticing of the connecting with the warm or cool air at the nostrils, or the rise and fall at the chest or the belly. And settle into a steady knowing of that experience moment after moment. the mind has wandered off into thinking, then the mind's job is to think. It's not a problem. Can gently come back to any of those anchors. Breathing or warm or cool air at the nostrils, rise and fall at the chest or the belly. Any sounds that you may experience, or sense of the whole body sitting. For these last couple of moments, just recommitting to posture, to finding the breath, knowing sensations in the body. Sit and know you're sitting. all conditioned things arise and pass away. Knowing this deeply brings about the greatest happiness. Thank you for your practice.
That's wonderful. I'm going to do an introduction for our esteemed teacher tonight. Meditation teacher Devin Berry began practicing in 1999. His teaching is rooted in the Buddha Dhamma and mindfulness daily life practices. Devin's training includes mindfulness-based stress reduction teaching training, the East Bay Meditation Center Commit to Dharma program, Spirit Rock's dedicated practitioners program, and Insight Meditation Society's 4-year residential retreat teachers program. Devin also co-founded both the Teen Sangha and Men of Color Deep Refuge group at East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland. In addition, almost 20 years ago, Devin began some of the first mindfulness programs in the San Francisco Bay Area schools, including weekly mindfulness groups for youth. Devin began working with youth over 25 years ago as a frontline advocate for marginalized youth living on the streets in recovery and exploitation. Over the years, Devin's work has included leading wilderness camp programs for teens, rites of passage programs for tweens, and a summer camp for boys. After retiring from youth work, Devin co-created Deep Time Liberation, an ancestral healing journey that explores the impact of ancestral legacy and intergenerational trauma on Black Americans. He is passionate about the power of witnessing and storytelling as a liberation tool. Devin is a father and teaches nationally, and we are so glad to have you here with us tonight.
You all, good to be with you tonight. So tonight I wanted to offer some reflections on actually the 5 daily reflections. And I chose this because this is usually at the beginning of the year. It's typically something that I work on, and it's pretty close to me right now, having had a number of health concerns and having had a couple of dear friends pass away of late. So these conversations have been there. And aging parents, my partner's parents. My partner lost a parent and had one just is in assisted living now, and it's cognitive decline and all these. So these 5 daily reflections have been on my mind. So these have been things that I've been looking at and exploring myself. So I will read them actually several times throughout the reflections here, but I'm going to start with them, or start with a version of them. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There's no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. So, and you know, just to say too, with these 5 daily reflections, part of the reason of going through them is I think, like most people, I know these things, and I know these things are going to happen, and the health problems concerns that I've had of late over this last year and a half, was the first time I actually have had anything like that happen to me. I've been, in my mind, perfectly healthy and strong and vibrant and running and moving along and doing all sorts of things. And I remember hearing from people oftentimes about various things that they had. And of course, I had compassion for them, and I would listen to them. And I think subconsciously, back in the way in the reaches of my mind, it was, well, this isn't going to happen to me. Like somewhere in there, this was like, really, this wasn't going to happen to me, that this doesn't happen. I'm always going to be this way. And it was similar to working with youth for all those years that I did. It was like one of those things of playing a game with the kids, right? When I was 50, which was the last time that I worked with kids. I think I remember playing basketball with a group of kids, 10 or 11 years old, and running up and down the court with them and playing a full game and playing pretty hard with them too. And I remember them needing, at the end of the game, needing some water and snacks. And then they bounced right back and they were ready to go. And meanwhile, this was my break. And there I was with a little tub and Epsom salt and my feet sitting in the Epsom salt and sitting down. And I'd sat down for half an hour and I realized that I couldn't get back up. My knee was stuck. And then this is the beginning of a knee operation that still hasn't happened, one of those things. So today we're contemplating these 5 recollections. And I will read a couple of different versions aloud several times just for the purpose of practicing here and now with them. And I will be exploring in a little bit more detail the second of these 5. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. So these 5 are from the, in the suttas, what's called the 5 subjects for contemplation. It's the Upajjhatthana Sutta, I believe, Upajjhatthana Sutta. And of course, you're hearing this from a Kansas, Texas, Mississippi accent. So Upajjhatthana, you're going to take that with a grain of salt if that actually is what it sounded, if actually the translation there. So both of these things land on both familiar and unfamiliar ears as these really somber revelations often. And yet really at their essence, these are direct, clear, concise, and compassionate. This is a gateway to true freedom, as Joseph would always teach it. This is a gateway to true freedom, understanding these, being with these. And the Buddha advised in this same sutta, this 5 subjects for contemplation. So the Buddha says, these are the 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained, right? So it's a gendered language, he uses that. These are the 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or man, lay or ordained. And these recollections are not simply concepts, but living truths that unfold within the experience of our daily lives, right? In the cacophony of chaos or serenity of peace, in the ebb and flow of love and relationships, these things are there. And my own experience has been that of a steady, regular contemplation of these. And I notice when it does, it begins to sort of trouble the water. It sort of moves things around a little bit, if you will, as these recollections remind us of the realities, these truths that are ever present, and yet often quite difficult or challenging to face. And they really invite us into a practice that is as much about confronting discomfort as it is about embracing each moment with awareness. And we were instructed by the Buddha to recollect, to anchor ourselves in the timeless wisdom of these 5 remembrances, Thich Nhat Hanh would call them, or these 5 recollections, these 5 subjects for contemplation on a regular basis. And so here we are doing so at the beginning of this year. And I invite you to really take these in as I read them and sit with them for a moment. We will hear them. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I am of the nature to die, and there is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. These recollections are facts. They're truths. This isn't Devin telling you something to believe in or something to take a leap of faith on. These first three are basically what drove the Buddha to become the Buddha. These were the central wake-up calls of his life before he woke up: old age, sickness, and death. And so if we were to dive in a little deeper into their essence, I am of the nature to grow old, I cannot escape growing old. In a society that often glorifies youth and tries to break the spell of aging and dreads these marks of time, this is a gentle reminder of the inevitable dance of life. Aging isn't a mistake. It's not a flaw. It's a testament to our journey, to our experiences, and the wisdom that we've garnered in this experience. It's natural, it's lawful, and it's universal. And whether we live in times of peace or chaos, aging is a universal truth. And by reflecting on this, we remind ourselves of the brevity of life. Should we spend this fleeting time in animosity, separating and moving further apart, or should we seek some understanding and compassion? And the second is, I am of the nature to grow ill, I cannot escape sickness. And I'll explore this one a little more in detail further, so I'll go to the next. I am of the nature to die, I cannot escape death. And this is the one I think that I find actually perhaps the most profound of all, right? This is the one that serves as a wake-up call. It nudges us to live with some purpose, to appreciate each fleeting moment, and to cultivate a relationship with the idea of impermanence. The dear friend right now is in stage 4 cancer, and it's been quite an exploration to have conversations and to practice with her and have practice meetings with her as she is quite literally going through the dying process. So in the face of tensions and wars and countless lives lost, the shadow of death is always there as this grim reminder of the cost of conflict that we see across the world. But when we recollect the inevitability of death, it shouldn't push us to despair, but rather motivate us as to value life more and value direct actions that promote peace more. I will be separated from everything and everyone I hold dear. Attachments, right, as comforting as they may be, are fleeting and temporary. And this shouldn't diminish the joy and love that we experience, but really invites us to love deeply, much more deeply, without clinging, knowing that every meeting has a parting. Right? There are these heartbreaking tales of families torn apart by war and strife that remind us of this bitter truth. We see this today. And yet it also emphasizes the need to cherish all of the connections that we have and to be a refuge while truth-telling and bridge building with those around us. Our actions, my only true possessions are my actions. So amidst the materialism or the hyper-materialism of that time, this is really a grounding truth, right? Our deeds, intentions, and the ripples that they create in the universe are the true legacies that we actually leave behind. Every thought, word, and deed has its consequences. So if we were to take a little bit deeper look at that second one, into the essence of the second recollection, I'm going to start with the story. And this is a story that I usually use in association with the compassion talk, but it works here, and I'll let you see at the end. This is a story from a book called The Heart's Code. It's by a psychoneuroimmunologist, a guy named Paul Pearsall, who's passed away since. And the story illustrates how the hearts of some heart transplant recipients seem to hold some memories that were from the person whose heart they received. So take that in for a moment, and don't get me wrong, I know this probably transcends much of what science knows, and yet I believe that there's a beauty and power in this story that's actually worth the consideration. So this is a story of David and Glenda, and they're having an argument while driving, and the argument doesn't get resolved, and they sat silently in this resentful energy. And they later got into a car accident, and David died, and his heart was donated, and Glenda wanted to meet the recipient of David's heart. So a meeting is arranged between Glinda and a young man whose life was saved by the gift of her husband's heart. And now before the meeting, Glinda, herself a doctor, said that she felt the presence of her husband tugging at her heart. And at that very moment, the doors to the hospital chapel where they were meeting opened, and in walks a young man and his mother. And Glinda said, "Can I put my hand on your chest and hold his heart? I mean, hold your heart." And the young man nods yes and unbuttons his shirt, took her hand and gently placed it against his chest. And she trembled and tears began to roll down her cheek. And she closed her eyes and whispered, "I love you, David. Everything is copacetic." She hugged the young man and they wiped tears from their eyes. And they sat down away from the others in the room and they held hands in silence for a while. And meanwhile, a few rows back, the young man's mother, speaking in a heavy Spanish accent, tells the doctors who were there that her son uses this word copacetic all the time. He never used it before he got his new heart. "Everything is copacetic" was the very first thing he said to me after the surgery. What does it mean? Glinda overhears this and her eyes widen. She turned towards the mother and said, "When David and I made up after an argument, that was our signal that all was okay." And the young man, it said, used to be a vegetarian and into heavy metal music and now craves meat and fatty foods. And now loves R&B and classic soul. Glinda matter-of-factly says that her husband loved meat, played in a Motown cover band. So the focus of the story is really Glinda and David, but the reason I offered here is that I heard an interview once on a college radio station way back when that talked about the young man, and that his takeaway from this had been how he no longer lived with any fear, and that he knew death would come, and that he had made peace with that, and it had drastically changed his life. And that he was living the best life he could on this borrowed time, and he had immense gratitude for this heart transplant. "I am sure to become ill. I cannot avoid illness. I am of the nature to have ill health. There's no way to escape having ill health." So no matter the marvels of modern medicine, institutional, naturopathic, homeopathic, or any diligent health routine that you might have, our bodies are not invincible. They decay, deteriorate, and break down. And this recollection asks us to value and cherish our health, to be compassionate with ourselves and others when illness strikes, and to recognize the fragility and the preciousness of this human form. The body's remarkable ability to function despite intricate complexity and our sometimes careless treatment of them is actually quite astonishing. This realization really becomes even more significant in the wake of the COVID-19 era that we're living in, right? This emphasizes our collective experience. This awareness of the second contemplation encompasses not only illnesses, but injuries ranging from minor to severe. This common challenges that we have associated with poor health, including visiting doctors or not visiting doctors, facing hefty medical expenses and bills, insurance or no insurance, consuming medications, dietary restrictions, physical exercise, and undergoing various surgeries and therapies for physical or mental well-being. And this oftentimes leads to the questions: do we accept ill health as part of life? Does our happiness or joy hinge solely on being in good health? Or can we find happiness, contentment, okayness simply in being alive and breathing? Right. Just an inquiry. Such reflections help us to move beyond the arrogance often associated with good health and the illusion of invincibility. And most important, or at least most important to me, is the fact that these 5 recollections in their profound simplicity serve as an entryway to the teachings of the Noble Eightfold Path. We can consider them as foundational stones, grounding us in the realities of existence. And by internalizing these truths, we become primed to navigate the path of wise view, wise understanding, because we've confronted the very core of human existence. These five, as I was taught, need to be embraced, known, deeply considered in order to be on the Eightfold Path with full understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And acknowledging the inescapable realities of aging, sickness, and death, we naturally incline towards wise effort, mindfulness, and concentration, seeking some balance and a focused mind to be able to meet these truths with some sense of balance, with some sense of equanimity. And these five remembrances can serve to motivate us to practice right here and now, acknowledging and accepting life's difficulties. And it's really, at least for me, it feels like it's all wrapped in a container, wrapped in a bow of fierce compassion and topped with this bow of kindness. Story about Evelyn, a woman that I worked with. So I most of the retreat practice that I've done has been long retreat practice. So I structured my life, and oftentimes the reason I was doing some of the youth work I was doing is that I was really interested in how the mind unfolds over long periods of time. So doing retreats of like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half. So I took a job once of helping to care for a woman, Evelyn. And Evelyn, this isn't her actual name. Evelyn was a spirited 85-year-old woman, still had a bit of a twinkle in her eye and a lovely, lovely smile. And she had a terminal illness that was slowly and unapologetically claiming her vitality. So as her backup caregiver, my role was to assist her with a few daily needs, mostly just to be a companion on her journey. So I was reading her stories. We watched old movies together, baseball games. We talked a little bit about baseball. She was a big baseball fan. And when I would enter her room, if she was not in pain and pretty lucid, she'd always smile and say, "Oh, here comes the reliever from the bullpen." So if you know baseball, right, there's this person that comes in towards the end of the game to relieve the starters. And so I was greeted by this soft voice and often sharing these anecdotes from this life, very well lived life. And her words, for me, were laced with wisdom and a touch of melancholy. And she would say, as I would write down in my journal, she would say, "Old body, I'm unwell, not dead, but definitely dying. The truth and nothing but the truth." It's what she would say to me. I'd come in and I'd say, how you doing, Evelyn? And she goes, "Old body, I'm unwell, not dead, but I'm definitely dying. That's the truth and nothing but the truth." It encapsulates the five recollections right there. And her acceptance wasn't defeat at all. It was a profound understanding of life's impermanence. In bringing her a meal once, she reflected on illness being a teacher for her, and the appreciation for simple joys, for the sunlight in the room. And I would move the bed so the sunlight would be in a particular place for her. She loved the melody of the birds that could be heard and the conversations that we had together. And when I was truly present, every word that she said struck a chord with me, reminded me of these second of the five daily reflections. Over the months, we talked quite openly and candidly about, between these gentle exercises I was helping her with in baseball games and reading travel journals to places that she had been. She wanted to sort of relive them and remember them. So we would read these travel journals. And she would talk about the severity of her physical and mental decline and the terminal illness. And we delved into conversations about life and loss. And Evelyn's perspective on her illness was not of bitterness, but of gratitude for the life that she had lived and for the moments that she still cherished. And she dipped her toes into the waters of despair, of course, because that makes absolutely natural and makes sense. And every now and then it would be sort of, why me? But there was a realization of this. And one day, after being away on a long retreat, I returned, and Evelyn, she didn't know my name anymore at this point and seemed quite confused because of the medications. You know, our bodies and minds are fragile, these fragile vessels in this way. And weeks later, she passed away. And I was there when she passed away, and myself and another caregiver were holding her hands. And we were there because her children, adult children, were unable to witness and watch this, which is actually quite difficult for all of us. Uh, and I reflected on her wisdom. It's really simple, practical wisdom about her life and her body and her illness. And in her acceptance of ill health, she found a peace that many, I believe, probably spend a lifetime searching for. And I really feel that she taught me that happiness isn't something that's conditional on perfect health, but is actually found in the depths of our own being and embracing life with all of its uncertainties and in finding joy in the mere act of living and breathing. So in exploring these teachings also, I found a rhythm that not only resonates with me during my day or on a day-to-day basis, but also highlights the quirks and the contradictions and the paradoxes of this, absurd shared human experience that we have. I am sure to become old, I cannot avoid aging. I am sure to become ill, I cannot avoid illness. I am sure to die, I cannot avoid death. I must be separated and parted from all that is dear and beloved to me. I am the owner of my actions, heir of my actions. Actions are the womb from which I have sprung. Actions are my relations. Actions are my protection. Whatever actions I do, good or bad, of these I shall become the heir. Another version of them. So contemplating illness is a touchstone that doesn't hinge on something I say or another says. It's a reminder that we will make it plain, have it out there, have it on the table. It's a touchstone that doesn't deceive, it doesn't delude, it doesn't defer anything. There's no judgment, there's no story, there's no complaint. It quite literally is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So I have another story for you. So I got pretty sick once during a 3-month retreat at IMS some years ago. I'd spent 3 months retreating somewhere else and then made a transition to IMS. And somewhere along the way, I'd gotten pretty sick. And this was really sort of a roll up the mat and go home time sickness. Too sick to go into the hall to practice. And I was at IMS, and my room was at IMS had, if you've been there before, in sort of in the older days, there was still a basement. So my room was in this basement. It was fairly dark, and I was the last room down the hall. And there was a constant water drip from the pipes above, just outside my window. So I started to feel actually quite isolated in my sickness with all of this going on, alone and without any support. And I'm definitely that type and that personality still at 59. When I'm sick, my first thought, cold or otherwise, is to call my mom. And somehow she's going to take care. That still is like a thought that's there for me. And so I really started to identify with all of this, the sickness that was there, and was really having this kind of woe is me experience with it. And I had made my way up to Joseph Goldstein's office for my practice meeting with him to tell him I was going home. And I was sitting in a chair outside the door because I didn't want to get him sick. And he skipped right past all of my going home declaration and talk and asked me if I had a chair in my room. And he asked me if I was willing to try one thing. And I said, and I said, sure, yeah, I have a chair in my room. Sure, I'll try this. So he encouraged me to take a vow, to sit in the chair and not get up for an hour and just see what happens. Just notice what happens, report back. And so I was working with an intention and occasionally would drop into the mind stream this mental note of letting go, letting go. And so at first, while sitting in this chair, there was coughing and there was lots of phlegm and a running nose and labored breathing and body aches. It was all happening. And I didn't move. I allowed it to happen. And then there was some refinement. There was a shift to knowing that experience quite intimately without any judgment, without any reaction. There was tightness and moisture and chills and dryness and tingling and numbness. And at some point, there was the lifting of low energy. And then the low energy would come back. There was sadness and there was fear. There was the decreasing and diminishment of fear. And then I was able to carry on much of that day and much of that night, sitting in the chair, noticing what Joseph had asked me, and noticing what he calls the continuous flow of dynamic processes. The only things that are ever actually happening, right? These are things just with our senses that we have. No separation, no fear, no self-centeredness, no small sense of self. And then there was this great arising of gratitude and contentment, this profound intimacy with experience. And I practiced in that room for the next few days with the symptoms fading and passing, and then I rejoined the Sangha in the hall to practice. And a great deal of trust and confidence, faith in the practice was developed while I was sick on that retreat. And I thought about my experience on the retreat over the months that followed and thought about, well, what about young people that fall ill? And what about those finely tuned athletic bodies that fall ill and die? And what about those in deep depression in the throes of addiction? Are they just supposed to make a vow while sitting until they have an insight? No, that's not the point of it. Understanding illness and death as inevitable is necessary to appreciate the meaning and beauty of life. And knowing this didn't make it any easier, but it was the truth. Each of these recollections, while appearing somber for some, and I say that because that's how they initially landed on me, is this is really bad news, is how it initially landed. While appearing somber is really a beacon guiding us towards a life of gratitude, a life of mindfulness, a life of purpose. They're not meant to dampen our spirits, but to enlighten the path and urging us to live with some depth, to live with openness, and to act with intention. The Buddha teaches that it's not wise to pretend otherwise. There are no alternatives or other options. We are all of this. We are all going to lose what we have if we ever had it. Like the changing seasons, the trees that grow on leaves, leaves turn and fall and grow again. We are all also part of this nature. We're not separate from it. We will all become otherwise, and it's not a mistake. It's a brief, honest look at the truth of the way things are. It's an encouragement, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, to keep our appointment with life, to enjoy the time we have, to recall the joys and sorrows that we have known. It's encouragement to not deceive yourself about the nature of your life. In integrating them in whatever you choose to do with life, the actions that you choose to take will come from a place of integrity and transparency, knowing these. There's no need to become otherwise when we're intimate with the present moment. This is the truth and nothing but the truth. I am of the nature to grow old. There's no way to escape growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I am of the nature to die. There's no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There's no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. So one of the reasons I read these regularly as I offer these reflections is because the first time that that was done for me by a teacher, I remember leaving the room and like pretending I had to go to the bathroom because I couldn't actually hear them again. I was like, my God, I cannot hear these again. I got it. I got it. Thank you. Stop, please. So a final story. People had, I believe it's from the New York Times, people have gathered around a group of Tibetan monks. They're hunched over a table where they were creating a sand mandala. And there are these metal cups that they're filled with sand of all these different colors, bright pink, these deep navy blue and silver and maroon and mustard yellow. And they're all lined at one end of the table. And I remembered my father pointing out a photo of a mandala in a museum years ago, explaining that its circular shape symbolized the cyclical nature of birth and death and the indestructible nature of the universe. And using these small scrapers and metal funnels, the monks methodically piped precise amounts of sand to create this intricate geometric pattern. That first evening, they painted a flower with multicolored petals. By the next evening, the flower was surrounded by circles of deep blue and pink and rectangles of turquoise and gold. The following Sunday morning, the temple was overflowing with people, and we all looked on as a group of brightly robed monks surrounded the mandala and began to chant in low guttural tones, their eyes closed and their palms pressed together. I stood on my toes and craned my neck to glimpse the mandala, hoping to see it encased in glass. Instead, I looked on in shock and utter disbelief as one of the monks began to move this feathery brush over the mandala, swirling together the gold and the navy, the circles and the rectangles. He moved along the edge of the table, sweeping away his work just as methodically as he had placed these grains of sand in the same space, transforming the mandala from pattern to pile. Tears filled my eyes. Not only because the mandala was gone, but because the hands that had created them were content to let it go. The teachings emphasize that change is the law of the universe. Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us that impermanence does not necessarily lead to suffering. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. Yet it was the sweeping away of the sand painting that helped me truly understand that change and impermanence are not just spiritual tenets, but simply laws of nature, ones that I'd struggled against and had been taught to ignore throughout much of my own medical training. Just as I expected that the gorgeous mandala had been created in order to be preserved, I had also expected that my patient in her 30s should live to see her children graduate from college, that the marathon runner should have lived to run more races. I expected partly as a result of my medical training to change and control what wasn't necessarily mine to change and control. How might I, as a doctor, help my ill and dying patients differently if I remembered that everything worldly, a painstakingly crafted mandala, a sky ablaze with color, our fragile human lives, is also temporary and subject to change? Accepting that life is finite wouldn't prevent me from drawing upon science to diagnose and treat disease, to use every tool available in medicine to alleviate suffering. But I wondered, if it would make it easier for me to endure the inevitability of change and loss that both my patients and I would experience. Perhaps it could bring me solace to remember that just as my patients' lives are temporary, so is their suffering. I wiped my eyes as I looked upon the remaining heap of this swirled sand, itself a thing of great beauty. And the monks scooped teaspoons of sand into plastic bags, handing one to each of us. Through the bag, the sand felt both tough and soft, the bright blues and pinks particularly visible when I held it up to the light. And when I returned to the hospital the next day, I thought of the mandala as I sat with a breathless man my own age dying from lung cancer and an agitated grandmother in the final stages of dementia. I would feel compassion for both of them, but I didn't leave work that day consumed with grief, despair, withdrawn, or disengaged. By accepting, acknowledging, and witnessing my patients' circumstances rather than fixating on their inherent tragedy, I could focus instead on changing what I could, easing breathlessness and agitation, explaining hospice services to their despondent families. Before leaving the hospital that night, I removed a bag of sand from my wallet, holding it up to the light, as I have done so many times over these years when I've needed to remind myself of the circularity of all things, of change as life's only constant. And that's by Dr. Sunita Puri. It's the author of something called The Good Night, Life and Medicine in the 11th Hour. And I'll leave you with this haiku. Ill health comes to all beneath the moon's silent gaze. Nature's truth unfolds. All conditioned things arise and pass away. Knowing this deeply brings about the greatest peace. Thank you.